You know, we finished off 2023 with a bang with headphones like the Modhouse Tungsten, the Meze Empyrean 2, which I'll be checking out soon, and this one right here, the Dan Clark Audio E3. So let's check this one out. What's cracking, everyone? My name is Ryan, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Dan Clark Audio E3. Now, this is a closed-back planar magnetic headphone from Dan Clark Audio. It retails in at $2,000. And before we get into this video, I do want to send a big thank you to Audio 46, who did provide me with this headphone so that I could get this video out to you guys. All thoughts and opinions, again, of course, are my own, but let's go ahead and start right away and talk about what you see here with the E3, as well as something you don't see here, and that is the driver that is inside of this headphone. So this is the 5th generation of the planar driver from DCA, and it also incorporates the Acoustic Metamaterial Tuning System, or AMTS, which we saw on the Expanse, we saw it on the Stealth, we saw it on the Carina, and now for half the cost, we're seeing it on the E3. Now, this particular version has said to have been tuned in a way so that it's supposed to smoothen out the top end so it doesn't come in quite as hot or quite as harsh, and also assist with sound staging. It's supposed to give it some liveliness to the sound as well, and we will talk about all of that when we get into sound. But then I also want to focus on the specs of the driver, because that is important. It is 27 ohms of impedance and around 90 dB per milliwatt of sensitivity. So this is going to take some power to drive it. And I shouldn't say some, it's going to take decent power to drive it. You don't want to be plugging this in straight to a phone, and we'll talk about that when we talk about power requirements. Now, I talked about also what you do see on this headphone. The very first thing that struck me was the glass. This is actually Gorilla Glass 3 on the cups, and it gives it just a... Okay, my descriptors are kind of bad here. I'm just going to call it a badass looking headphone because that's honestly what I feel about it. But when you look at that, you know, you see right through to this underneath here, and it almost has a grill type design, and that is intended from DCA because they want this to look kind of like an open back headphone would look with the grills, because it's supposed to be an open back type sound. And you're also going to see these holes right here. Now, these are actually dual mode bass ports. So as it sounds, it's supposed to assist with the bass response of this headphone. And again, we will talk about that as we get into sound. Now, taking a look at the rest of the headphone here, I can tell you that in typical DCA fashion, this is a very premium built type headphone. And the materials here are premium materials. The headband, I want to take attention to that next because I really dig the headband on this headphone. It's all black. It's got this blue stitching that says E3 on the top, and then underneath you'll see more blue stitching with this kind of bumpy-ish type material underneath on the padding. And really quick, as far as the E3 goes, I thought this was clever as well. Instead of kind of doing a follow-up to the Ether and calling this the Ether 3, they've decided, because it's not really that type of sound signature, that this is just a standalone E3, and that's kind of how they landed on the name for this. But it's also unique because you can flip it around any way you want, and it's going to say E3 no matter which way that you flip the headband around. So for all of you guys out there named Bob, this headphone was made for you. The other thing that I will say on the comfort of this is that because it has that bumpiness on the headband there, I did get some discomfort at first when I was wearing it on my head, but I am happy to report that it does break in over time, and I had no discomfort after I've been wearing this a little bit of time. And also, one other thing about the headphone strap and the comfort of this that I really dig is the fact that this is a self-adjusting headband system. So basically, you know, you don't need to click this out any notch. It's going to expand and detract into place to be a good fit for your head every time you put them on. And I really appreciate that when I see things like this incorporated into a headphone. Now, the other thing is the pads here on the cups, they are very reminiscent to other DCA headphones we've seen before. They're very plush, very soft. They seal extremely well. There is good clamp force here, and I wouldn't call this overly clampy, but it seals. And that's how you want a close back to be, to kind of seal in the outside noise, because I will tell you, these bass ports will have a little bit of leakage because of how they function, but it's a great seal. The headphone weighs about 455 grams, so it's a little heavy, but you don't really feel that. The weight's evenly distributed, and I find this to be extremely comfortable. Now, this is also pretty typical of Dan Clark headphones, that they will fold down and you actually get this nice case that they come with, and they'll go, right inside the case for a portability type situation. So these are meant to be taken on the go with you. And then cable wise, you get a choice of several different options from 2.5, 3.5, 4.4, XLR, and then different cable lengths that you can choose. Cost may change a little bit there as well, but they really take care of you inside the box with all of that. Then you get some informational, cards, serial card, things like that inside the box as well. We're kind of used to seeing that from DCA. I will tell you, as far as the cable goes, my personal recommendation, get a balanced cable. This headphone, as I said, requires some power. Unless you've got a souped up amp that does quite a bit out of the single ended, get a balanced cable. It's going to get you the most bang for your buck, I guess. One way to look at that. All right, so let's go ahead now, and I do want to talk about amp pairings and kind of my setup from there. Hey, super quick here, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel, because I am really trying to grow my sub count. I would love to get to 2,000 by around March, when I'm going to be heading off to New York Can Jam. So if you'd like to do that, help me out, join the channel. I would highly appreciate that, and I'll let you get back to the video. All right, so I'm going to run you through all the gear that I used on this headphone and tell you that this headphone scales pretty damn well when you give it some juice. Now, starting off in a portable solution with my Cayin RU7, did it power this headphone? It did. It's about 400 milliwatts out of the balanced, and I definitely preferred balanced on that dongle DAC, but I will tell you that I was at about 60 to 80% in the volume, depending on the track I was playing, and that was on high gain, and I got a good, solid listen. Not quite as much bass as what I wanted, but everything else was really good. And I don't want to just focus on bass here, so give me a moment here on that. So when I moved on to something a little more powerful, like my Cayin HA-3A, or a lot more powerful, I should say, that was definitely a much better listen than my RU7 as far as just all of the sound profile, mid-range especially, because the IHA6 is so good on mid-range. And then when I stepped it up to my HA-3A, which is not the most powerful amp, but it is a tube amplifier and controlled the sound of this so very well, that gave me the probably best overall sound from bass, mid-range, and treble. And I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But I do want to give a big shout out to the Schiit Midgard once again. When I plugged this into the Midgard using the Halo topology, so I went XLR, not only did I have enough power for this headphone on high gain, but I probably was around 40 to 50% on the volume dial. It was just such a good sound out of this headphone. I had good fullness of bass, very full mid-range response. Treble was nice and smooth, and I'll talk about the sound profile in a second, but I highly recommend, if you got the Midgard and want to try that with this headphone, you're going to be good. At least if you go out of that Halo topology XLR, which is something you should do anyway if you own that amplifier, because that is one thing you can do to take advantage, and it just controlled the driver of this so very well. But my HA-3A, honestly, guys, was my preferred listen overall, just because it did have the fullest and thickest bass response that I could get from this headphone, while also maintaining excellent mid-range and excellent treble and really just everything else. But between that and the Midgard, it was close. And Midgard's only $200, guys. So again, just to give another shout out to that. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the sound profile of the E3. I am going to run through the typical bass, mid-range, and treble, but I'm not going to stop at each one and do a track impression. Instead, I want to give you some track impressions after I get through this. So with the bass, I will tell you that it is a nice full-bodied bass. It does have a good extension, and if you give it some power, that extension becomes more full. It is not the thickest bass response by any means. You know, that's where I feel like it kind of incorporates some of that open back feeling to it, because It's got some good slam to it. Yes, it's got some good slam to it. You did not hear me wrong when I said that. It does have some good slam to it, especially when you can give it some good power. On my HA-3A, that was the thickest bass response I got, and the midguard was almost there as well. The midguard had really good bass response as well. As far as that slam goes, just wasn't quite as thickened up. I guess one way to kind of explain that is, I think about my kids, they like to color, right? So if I gave you a page of a person and said, color this object in, page of a person, color the object. Okay, stick with me here. And I said, color this in, my son or my daughter would color it into the lines and do the best they can, and it would look good. And I feel like that's the midguard. It's good, colored in, full bass response. But when I throw it on my HA-3A, suddenly those colors have a little bit more pop and textures, and there's shading and just all those things that add to it, just amplify it a little bit more. And that's kind of how I describe the bass response of this. It's nice and clean as well. Now, the mid-range is kind of the same way in that it's a nice full mid-range, and there's slap, there's punch, whatever you want to call it. If you get punched or slapped, it's going to hurt. Well, it's not going to hurt, but you know what I mean? It's got that going on for the mid-range here, and I love that because, again, I didn't get that when I owned my Aeon Noir. I'm really happy that this one's got that going on. And again, with some better power, gives you better slap and punch. And I just love that part of the mid-range. But don't get me wrong, it's got good vocal presentation there as well. That ear gain region, it does a nice job of that, of presenting those vocalists to you. Female vocalists, I think, sound a little closer than male vocalists. It's not by much. And of course, it's going to depend on the vocalist as well, right? And drums and things, I've already covered that. They have good punch to them, but, a lot of natural instruments, saxophones, pianos, jazz music, things like that sounded so good as far as that mid-range goes and had a lot of resolution and fullness to it. And you could tell that stage that it had, but it wasn't overly exaggerated. Things were in their proper place. And then as we get into the treble, now that treble is just kind of like a soft pillow, but remains sparkly. That's the best way I know how to put it. Now, if you have a track that is not recorded well, it's going to show it to you. So don't think that this is going to tame sibilance or correct a bad recording. Come on, it's not going to do that. It's going to show you the recording. So know that going into this, but I'm okay with that because that treble response is really good here. There are times, like I said, on bad tracks that, it can get a little bit harsh, or on some hip hop and things, as I mentioned before, can get a little sibilant as they're spitting their lyrics at you, but that's fine. I mean, that's kind of showing you what the track is and how it's made. But, this treble response here is very good, and it's also very wide. There is definitely good soundstage. It does sound like an open back headphone would sound when it comes to that staging presentation, and the imaging, spot on imaging. I really dug the imaging of this headphone as well. Now, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the tungsten that I just talked about with the treble response. Now, the tungsten double-sided, I gotta say, definitely had a softer experience on that treble response than this one. And I don't know why I'm talking about those two, because closed back, open back, I don't know, it just reminded me of that, on how impressed I was with the treble response of that one. And this one does that for me from a closed back standpoint as well. All right, let's go ahead and talk about a few track examples for this headphone next. I feel like since I was just talking about treble, let's talk about the Elden Ring soundtrack. All right, for those of you out there that aren't gamers, it's a video game. It's the soundtrack for the video game, and it's incredible. It's so incredible, the guy's doing tours of the Elden Ring music. So, I mean, look it up if you haven't already. I looked it up in Tidal. I downloaded the list. There's like 50 some tracks to it, and I sampled several of them. And this brought me, kind of gave me a trip down memory lane of playing that video game, which, funny enough, the first time I played that video game was with the AN2 Noir, and I remember saying how engaged I got with that game on the Noir. I can imagine I would be even more engaged on this headphone. And it sounds so just spacious, and it's obviously orchestral music. There's good layering to it. Bass is very natural, but it's very full, but it's also in the mix, but separated enough to where it doesn't interrupt mid-range and the mid-range doesn't interrupt the treble. String instruments and things, as I said, are just so pleasant and natural here. It was an excellent soundtrack to listen to on this headphone for that type of music. And that's the kind of orchestral music that I like when I listen to classical, is soundtracks and things like that. And that was, as I said, excellent. Now, there's a couple of other tracks I definitely want to give you guys. Now, the first one is Miss Ida B by Buddy Guy, and that's a bluesy type track. I like sampling this one because this will show you if you have a headphone that's too hot in the treble, and it was not. And I loved the bluesy guitar on this and the solo moments and things, and it was just right there and just such a good, just solid, sharp instrument of the guitar, but never to the point of being piercing and fatiguing. And, if you like blues music and things, this headphone just assists with that so well. Again, if you have a good recorded track, you got to watch that. And that track just sounded excellent. The vocals and things were right in their place. They weren't pushed forward. Drums, again, had that good mid-range clarity and, some dynamics to it and some punchiness to it. Snares, by the way, remind me of some Rice Krispie cereal. There's snap, there's crackle, and there's pop. And it comes all together and just is an excellent listen as well. Now, another track example I want to give you guys, and this was probably my biggest just engaged time I had with this headphone. And that track was This Is a Man's World by David Gogo. Obviously, not his song, but his rendition of the song. My favorite rendition of the song ever, and I heard it on this headphone. And that was the moment where I stopped and I added this to my list of my next closed back to buy, because I have a closed back dynamic. I wanted a closed back planar. I moved on from the noir. This is going to take the spot, because what I found with that track was right at the beginning, there's instruments that are off to the left. And they weren't like off to the left here. They were off to the left here. And I can imagine just being there and hearing that music. I can imagine it right now, man. It was just such a good sound. And then when his vocals came in, his vocals were just very natural. Again, I'm going to say that word a lot. And just not brought forward in my ear or anything. And then you had that nice bass that went underneath. And it was full. It wasn't lacking. It engaged me into the track and gave me that punchiness. And that slam again, and treble response, all of that. There's a moment, I think it's around 326, where the solo kicks in with the guitar. And, you would think that it'd be really loud and piercing from a dynamic range standpoint. It wasn't. It was meant to be there. And I closed my eyes. I was doing the air guitar or playing the drums, or just, closing my eyes and enjoying the track and enjoying the music instead of thinking about the device I was listening to. That's what it's all about, guys. And I loved that experience with that track. Now, one other track impression I will give you guys just really quick is In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins, only because I wanted to sample dynamic range. And the one thing I would tell you about that is I think Phil's voice on this particular track with this headphone was a little further back than what I remember before. That's probably one example where I would say it wasn't the most vocal focused that I've heard before. And I do believe that was on the HA-3A. It wasn't bad. I'm just saying that, that was probably a little further back, but that's also showing off the dynamic range, because then when I had the big moment, it balanced so very well. And there was really good just differences of soft to loud moments in that, to where, man, this is going to be a great headphone for gaming. This is going to be a great headphone for watching movies and multiple genres of music, such as rock and roll, such as, bands like In This Moment, Five Finger Death Punch, Avatar, Linkin Park, bands that are going to just come at you and be aggressive. And I listened to those tracks on this headphone, and they were aggressive, but not fatiguing, as long as the track wasn't a bad recording. I'll keep saying that. And then hip hop music, I enjoyed hip hop music on this headphone. I did not enjoy it on the Noir. So that's saying something right there. Is it the biggest amount of beat and biggest amount of slam you're going to get? No, my Atrium Closed, I got that for that. But it was still an enjoyable listen. By the way, I can listen to the lyricist all day long very clearly on this headphone as well. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about some comparisons really quick to both the Atrium Closed and the Meze Lyric. And so starting with the Atrium Closed, because I own that headphone, was very easy for me to A-B to this. Biggest differences there, Atrium Closed has got thicker bass response. It's weightier. It's got bigger punch and slam than even this one does. It's a dynamic and it's ZMF. It's their house sound, and it's still why I really love that headphone. It's a good contrast to this, by the way, because when I want that big, just aggressive sound of that bass response, I'm going to reach for the Atrium Close. When I want something a little more pleasant but doesn't lose out on dynamics, I'm going to reach for this. And then I would say the top end of the Atrium Close can get a little hot in the treble, depending on the pads, depending on the amp pairing, whereas this one did not as much. And that mid-range is really good on both headphones, to be honest, guys. But with the Atrium Closed, it's more amp picky on the mid-range than it is going to be with something like this, because on the Atrium Closed and some amps, that mid-range was not as flattering. And I would say also tubes make a big difference, right? I mean, OTL tube amps with the Atrium Closed, man, that's just a magical sound that is not for everyone, but I love that sound. OTL is obviously not probably going to work as well on something like this, but what is my HA-3A tube amp, which is a transformer tube amp. It's a different type of tube amp. And then the Meze Lyric, which I don't have on hand anymore, but you know, I spent enough time with it to give you a good idea of the differences there. I said the Meze Lyric at the time was the best closed back planar you could get for $2,000. Yeah, until I heard this. This one takes the cake for that now. It doesn't make the Meze Lyric bad by any means, so if you own that, don't think you're missing out. But I will say, like, mid-range is much better on this headphone. It's much more consistent than on the Meze Lyric. The Meze Lyric's easier to drive. There is that. I mean, this one is definitely going to take more juice than what the Lyric did. I think both have a good bass response from what I remember anyway. Both of them sound wide. By the way, this one sounds the widest between this and the Atrium Closed for sure, and probably even the Meze Lyric, although if I A-B'd, I'd be able to give you a better answer on that. And then the treble response here is still so excellent. And yeah, I just think it's definitely going to beat out the Meze Lyric for what that had. Both, really all three are comfortable headphones there as well. But again, to kind of end that out, this is an excellent contrast to the Atrium Closed. Should you own that headphone and you're looking for a planar in the same price range, I can't recommend this more going along with that type of a headphone. All right, let's wrap this one up, guys. This has me really excited for 2024 because this was such a good offering from DCA, and I got to applaud them on that for being able to do what they've done with this headphone. And that's how I'm going to end this video, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed this. If so, smash that like button or slap that like button, if you will, for me. And please subscribe to the channel. I'm working my way towards 2,000 and beyond, and I'm looking forward to that. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.